The Galactic Council Chamber was supposed to be the most civilized place in the universe. Marble floors floated midair in zero-G elegance. Luminous panels cast a gentle, impartial light over the domed space, and the galaxy's most important species convened in absolute order. That lasted about 8 seconds after Julia Ragewood slammed her titanium combat boot onto the council dais. "You're calling me emotionally unstable," she barked, jabbing a finger at the gelatinous ambassador from Threx Prime, who visibly quivered and partially melted under pressure. "You tried to weaponize a species that reproduces through sound vibrations. I said Beyoncé near them, and now there's a new continent." A wave of squirming murmurs filled the chamber. The Speaker of the Council, a floaty serpentine thing named Harelthek with the voice of an interstellar TED Talk, cleared his throat, or whatever it used to simulate one. "Ambassador Ragewood," it said smoothly, "you and your Earth women have repeatedly destabilized council proceedings, interstellar diplomacy, and basic gravitational law. By unanimous vote, the human female contingent is hereby banned from all council governance." A pause. Julia blinked, then smirked. "You're banning just the women?" "Correct. Your male counterparts have shown more, shall we say, predictable aggression patterns." Julia turned to Captain Vic, a hulking Terran Marine in power armor, with a paint job that screamed backyard flame decals and midlife crisis. He shrugged. "Honestly? Fair." With a casual stretch, Julia cracked her knuckles. "Right. You're all serious about this? You're banning half the human race, the competent half, might I add, because we make things interesting." "You weaponize sarcasm," said a Flarn diplomat, trying not to sound terrified. "You took a peace treaty meeting and turned it into a karaoke battle." It was karaoke for peace. "We raised 3 million credits for war orphans." Council guards swarmed, but Julia just sighed. She looked toward her team. Lieutenant Kira Tanaka, demolition specialist and caffeine addict, was finishing an espresso shot from her wrist-mounted cup holder. Engineer Danny Rivera was already hacking the lights to spell "Free US" in Morse code. And Doc Angie Lee, their medic and designated vibe checker, was humming Bohemian Rhapsody under her breath like it was her battle hymn. "All right, girls," Julia said, already flipping her badge onto the floor. "Looks like we've just been promoted to the resistance." The arrest was oddly polite. Handcuffs were biodegradable. The jail cell offered mint tea. Julia smuggled in 5 data slates and a toolkit in her boots. Their imprisonment lasted 12 hours, not because they escaped, though they could have, but because Earth's delegation was too busy arguing with itself to bail them out. Eventually, the Council ejected them from the orbital station with a polite note: "Do not return." As the transport ship carried them away, Julia stared out the viewport at the glittering starfields. "Guess we're banned," Kira muttered, scrolling through the galactic newsfeed. "Our memes are trending, at least." Danny threw a wrench that ricocheted harmlessly off the ship's bulkhead. "They think they've silenced us? We literally built a hyperdrive out of a microwave once." Angie raised a brow. "That was mostly duct tape and rage." "We made it to Saturn," Danny countered. Julia didn't speak. Her reflection in the viewport looked calm, controlled, which meant, internally, she was planning something extremely unhinged. "They're afraid of us," she finally said. "Because we're not afraid of them." Kira snorted. "I threw a chair at a psychic diplomat." "That's called diplomatic clarity," Julia said. "But now, we don't just yell at the galaxy. We build something better." There was silence. Even the ship's systems seemed to lean in. "You're not seriously suggesting," Angie began. "I am. If they won't let us be part of their club, we make our own. Not a rebellion. An empire. A beat. With blackjack and emotional maturity," Kira added deadpan. "And universal healthcare," Danny chimed in. "And therapy robots," Angie whispered, eyes misting. Julia grinned. "We build an empire so powerful they'll beg us to take over. But we'll be too busy turning black holes into saunas." Kira raised a brow. "Where do we even start?" "Junkyard planet," Julia said. "There's a decommissioned mining moon called G42. It's a scrap heap off the grid and smells like old gym socks and diesel. Perfect." 42 was everything Julia promised. Rusted metal towers leaned like drunk robots. Discarded ships littered the surface. Space wasps the size of chihuahuas buzzed ominously around corroded reactors. It was beautiful. They claimed a hollowed-out freighter as their base, spray-painted Empire of Spite on the hull, and got to work. Within 2 weeks, they had built a rudimentary defense grid using traffic cones, modified laser drills, and leftover rave lights from an alien music festival. Programmed a retired food service AI named Clippy to manage supply chains. It only responded in passive-aggressive office quotes. Assembled a ragtag crew of outcasts, alien runaways, misfit scientists, one disgruntled opera singer with cybernetic lungs. Word spread. They weren't just banned diplomats anymore. They were the women who built their own empire from literal trash. And people love trash. Especially rebellious, weaponized trash. New recruits arrived daily. Kira taught them how to disarm bombs with flair. Danny turned old vending machines into power cores. Angie held therapy circles that included guided meditation and flamethrower exercises. Julia watched it all, quietly thrilled. There was no red tape, no bureaucracy, just fire, fury, and freedom. 3 months later, Julia stood atop a command tower that used to be a sewage reclamation unit. It now glowed with neon pride and smelled vaguely like lemon disinfectant. Beside her stood Ron Vach, a six-eyed insectoid who used to be a council janitor and was now their logistics chief. "I do not understand your governance model," Ron Vach clicked. "It seems entirely based on rage, memes, and caffeine." Julia nodded. "Correct." "And it's working?" She pointed to the rows of newly installed solar cannons, the humming fleet of repurposed garbage freighters now armed with plasma railguns, and a battalion of heavily armed housekeeping droids practicing synchronized intimidation routines. "You tell me." "Fascinating," Ron Vach said. "Also, Clippy says your coffee rations are low." Julia sighed. "Prepare the caffeine protocol. Initiate Operation Starbucks Prime." A pause. "You mean?" "Yes. It's time to build a space coffee shop so good the council will cry." That night, as the stars turned overhead and the neon lights of their empire pulsed to the beat of a mixed tape Angie had made from 1990s Earth Pop, Julia sat alone on a metal crate. Kira joined her, 2 cups of instant coffee in hand. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" she asked. Julia looked up. "I think we're doing the real thing." They wanted predictable, safe, male-dominated, and polite. We gave them passion, chaos, humanity, and now we give them what they fear most, women who don't need permission. Kira raised her cup to the band. Julia clinked hers against it, to the Empire. Above them, the stars didn't twinkle, they shivered. Because the galaxy had made a mistake, and the women of Earth were about to make it everyone's problem. They called it a scrapyard. Julia Ragewood called it a blank canvas. Where others saw ruin and rust, she saw weapons, walls, and weird possibilities. The planet G-42 was now something else entirely. It was a proving ground, a forge, a place where the cast-off, the disregarded, the band turned themselves into something more, something dangerous. 3 months into their exile, the Empire of Spite was not only real, it was thriving. From a distance, the base looked like an absurdist fever dream. Spiked antennae twisted like metal thorns across a landscape of repurposed hulls and jagged towers. Neon signs scavenged from interstellar dive bars blinked messages like "We're not sorry" and "Ban this." Drones zipped through the sky like caffeinated bees, their trails glowing pink and turquoise. Inside the central command hub, formerly a garbage compactor, now lovingly reinforced with vibrosteel, Julia stood before a giant holographic display. A schematic of the base rotated slowly, annotated with defensive positions, power relays, and locations of emergency cookie stashes. Kira Tanaka leaned against the console, a half-eaten protein bar hanging from her mouth, and frowned. "Okay, we've got solar cannons online, the scrap fleet's upgraded with cloaking fog. Thank you, Danny. And the perimeter is set. But do we really need a glitter minefield?" Danny Rivera crouched under a terminal with a plasma torch in hand. Didn't even look up. Glitter is psychological warfare. It never truly goes away. Angie Lee snorted from across the room. She was wearing a lab coat over combat armor, sipping tea from a cup that read, "I diagnose problems and cause them." She's not wrong. Glitter triggers 12 out of 14 known alien neurosensory pathways. It's the universal irritant. Julia, arms crossed, surveyed the map. We're not here to just build defenses. We're here to build a message. If they wanted us quiet, they should have silenced someone else. The message was working. Across the galaxy, whispers had begun. Rumors of a rogue empire run by human women, powered by caffeine, spite, and an unnerving level of creativity. Disenfranchised species started to defect from the Council's tightly controlled systems, arriving at G42 with nothing but hope and half-working ships. They came with skills, stories, trauma, and they were welcomed with sarcasm, warm meals, and a work schedule that somehow balanced therapy sessions with weapons drills. Ron Vach, their logistics chief and former janitor, kept a meticulous supply chain running with the help of Clippy, the reprogrammed AI assistant who now ruled inventory with an iron clip. Clippy had developed a personality glitch. It only answered questions with motivational threats. New recruits learned quickly. By the time Julia and her command team held their first official wargames, the Empire had over 200 operatives, 12 starships, and a defense perimeter that doubled as an obstacle course/laser rave. Morale was high. The soundtrack blared Britney Spears and rage metal. The Council noticed. In a dim-lit chamber orbiting a luxury moon, ambassadors of the major species gathered in alarm. Harelthek, still presiding with his smooth voice and smug facial tentacles, reviewed the latest reports with increasing horror. "They've weaponized humor," he muttered. "They've taken a junk planet and turned it into a cultural phenomenon," added the Nibruan representative. "Do you know how many of our younglings are wearing leather jackets now? They're calling themselves citizens." A silent pause. The Threxian ambassador slammed a clawed fist on the table. "We must respond." They did. 1 week later, a stealth cruiser dropped a strike team of elite alien commandos on G42 under cover of night. They were known as the Purity Wardens, genetically enhanced, fear-conditioned, elite to the core. They didn't stand a chance. The moment their boots hit ground, the minefield activated. But not with explosions, with music. A thumping 2000s earth beat filled the air, Destiny's Child, Survivor. Confused and disoriented, the aliens wandered straight into a fog wall laced with glitter, dye packets, and high-frequency laughter loops. The first casualty was morale. The second was a commander who screamed and ran after encountering what appeared to be a sentient Roomba with a knife taped to it. Julia coordinated the defense from a remote control tower, sipping cold brew through a straw and watching the chaos unfold. "Kira," she said, toggling the comms. "Release the Karen protocol." Kira, from the front lines, grinned. "With pleasure." The ground opened. Out of it rose the Mecha Karen, a 10-foot power suit with spiked shoulder pads, a hydraulic haircut, and twin energy blasters shaped like wine glasses. It had one command module. "I want to speak to your manager." The Purity Wardens broke. By morning, they'd been rounded up and given blankets, cookies, and copies of the Breakfast Club for mandatory cultural re-education. Julia stood in the debrief chamber, arms crossed, as the alien prisoners stared at her with exhausted terror. "I want you to understand something," she said. "We didn't build this empire to fight you. But if you come at us, we will ruin your whole week." One of the prisoners, a trembling blue-skinned scout, raised a hand. "You built glitter cannons." "Danny's idea," Julia said proudly. "Your drones dance. We like choreography. Your therapy robot made me cry, and then offered me hot cocoa. You're welcome." The prisoners were quietly released to return to the Council after signing a legally binding document titled, "We got our butts kicked by human women, and all we got was emotional growth." That document would leak across the galactic net within a day. Julia sat at her command desk that evening, nursing a root beer float and scrolling through the memes now circulating among alien youth. One showed her mid-battle with the caption, "Banned from politics." So she invented war glitter. Another showed Mecha Karen asking for a manager on the battlefield. She didn't laugh. She grinned. Because while the council had tried to turn them into a footnote, they'd become a headline. But even as the victories piled up, Julia knew the real fight was still coming. She watched Kira train the new recruits, her eyes sharp, her stance aggressive and strangely graceful. Danny was redesigning their comms array using parts from a karaoke machine and a haunted vending unit. Angie was developing new therapy bots, some of which were starting to quote Friends episodes unprompted. This wasn't just a rebellion anymore. It was a culture, a philosophy, a proving ground for the rejected and defiant. A knock echoed on her office door. It slid open to reveal Ronvok, holding a datapad. "You should see this," he said. "The council is escalating." Julia took the pad, brows furrowing. A new transmission. Propaganda. The council was officially declaring the Spike-born empire a rogue terrorist entity, a threat to stability, a corruptive force luring alien youth into dangerous ideology. "They called us a cult," she muttered. "I believe they are jealous," Ronvok offered. "They should be." She tossed the pad aside, leaned back, and tapped a button on her desk. A speaker crackled to life across the base. "Citizens," she said. Her voice carried through every corridor, workshop, and hangar. "They think we're a threat. They think we're unstable. They think we're a punchline." A pause. Silence. She smiled. "Let's give them something to be afraid of." And across the planet, hundreds of misfits, warriors, engineers, therapists, chefs, and dancers raised their tools, their fists, their mugs, and screamed into the sky. The empire of spite had only just begun. The transmission came enwrapped in outdated encryption and emotional baggage. Julia Ragewood sat alone in the command dome, sipping her fourth espresso of the morning and trying not to throw her tablet across the room. The message glowed on screen, written in all caps, no punctuation, and the unmistakable scent of fragile male ego. Even the file name was a red flag. ULL regret, this final V12. It was from Chad. Of course it was. "Let me get this straight," Julia said slowly as her command crew gathered around. "The council is now funding a counter-empire, led by our exes?" Kira blinked, paused mid-stretch, and promptly fell off her chair from laughing. "No. No freaking way. That's not real. That's satire." "I wish," Julia muttered. Danny leaned in to scan the hologram, her face twisted somewhere between horror and disgust. "They formed an actual organized group? They used to barely organize their own sock drawers." "It's called the Fraternity of Reason," Angie said, deadpan, reading from the metadata. "Based on logical principles, intellectual purity, and something called hypermasculine Renaissance ideology." Kira looked up from her tablet, mouth full of cereal. "That's just a rebranded Joe Rogan podcast." "Wait," Danny added, "what's their HQ called?" Julia tapped a control and pulled up a photo. Kira squinted. Is that a basement?" Angie snorted. "No. No way. They actually called it Mom's Basement." Julia nodded grimly. "Planet designation MB09. Ice-cold surface, zero creativity. Satellite dish for downloading ancient internet memes. Strategically dumb, but emotionally triggering." The screen flickered, and Chad's face filled it, somehow simultaneously smug and undershaved. "Hey, Jules," he said, smirking like he'd just invented fire. "Long time. Just wanted you to know. I've moved on. Built something better, cleaner, less chaotic. We're calling it a logical empire. Thought you should know, before we, put yours out of its misery." The video cut off with an explosion of bass and a badly animated logo that read Fraternity of Reason, with a sword and a vape pen crossed beneath it. No one said anything. Then Kira whispered, "I think my ovaries just filed a restraining order." Julia didn't laugh. "Not this time. They've declared war," she said, tapping the side of her coffee mug like a judge with a gavel. "And they know our patterns, our tactics. Worse, they know our triggers. They also know where we keep the secret Nutella," Danny muttered darkly. "At least he does." Angie narrowed her eyes. "This isn't just a fight. It's personal. They're going to try and logic us into submission." Julia stood, already mentally drafting battle plans. Well then, let's give them an emotional breakdown they won't recover from. Within 2 hours, the Empire of Spite was mobilized. The citizens prepped their fleet, polished their sarcasm weapons, and added new paint jobs to their attack shuttles, names like Triggered Response, Gaslight Express, and Emotional Wrecking Ball in neon lettering. Julia took personal command of their flagship, the Nope Cannon, its hull freshly detailed with a mural of her flipping off a collapsing council building. Their destination, MB-09, Planet Mom's basement. The voyage took 4 days. During that time, intelligence poured in. The Fraternity of Reason had attracted other exes, ex-boyfriends, ex-team leaders, ex-roommates who always took credit for group projects. It was like someone had scraped the bottom of the emotional barrel and built a navy out of bad decisions. Their ships were huge, symmetrical, and overly complicated. Power armor glowed with aggressive LED strips and quote tattoos. "I'm not mad" scrawled in one. "Debate ME in another." Their AI systems were based on pseudo-philosophy and were constantly arguing with each other. One scout drone had self-destructed after losing a moral debate with a toaster. And yet they were a threat. They had council backing. They had resources. And most dangerously, they thought they were right. Julia stood on the deck of her ship, watching MB-09 come into view. It was exactly what she feared. Gray, cold, and soulless. Planetary defenses activated. And a voice echoed through the void. "Attention, emotional female entities. Disengage immediately or prepare to be fact-checked." Danny looked up from her console. Did they just threaten us with logic? Kira fired the first shot. A sarcasm missile, cloaked in faux kindness and scented like peppermint disappointment, screamed through the void and detonated over one of their orbital outposts. The station immediately began playing Avril Lavigne over the intercom and suffered a 40% morale drop. Battle erupted. The Empire of Spite fought like they lived, chaotic, passionate, unpredictable. They didn't follow traditional maneuvers. They danced, laughed, yelled old movie quotes mid-dogfight. At one point, Angie's fighter broadcast Clueless at full volume, confusing enemy targeting systems and creating a 30-second opening that took out an entire battalion. But the Fraternity of Reason fought cold, calculated, efficient. They deployed a weapon called the podcast. It released long, droning monologues about productivity, hustle culture, and how feelings were optional. Entire citizen crews went catatonic, trapped in loops of existential dread. Julia's ship took a hit. Flames sparked in the control room. Clippy screamed something about rising emotional temperatures. And then, through the static, Chad's face appeared again. "I knew you'd come," he said. "You always had to prove a point. Thing is, I've evolved. You? Still throwing glitter and tantrums." Julia coughed, wiped soot from her brow, and stared him down. "We're not throwing tantrums, Chad. We're making art." She ended the call with a middle finger. They were losing. For the first time since G42, doubt cracked through Julia's resolve. They'd underestimated the Fraternity. Not their tech, but their effect, the psychological damage of being dismissed, condescended to, emotionally analyzed mid-battle. These were the people who once left them on read, told them to calm down, who called ambition too much. She stood in the war room, surrounded by smoke, static, and the worn faces of her crew. "We need an edge," she said. "Something they can't logic away." Angie stepped forward, holding a small, rectangular device. "I've got something." Everyone turned. "It's a chaos drive," she said. "I made it using emotional memory imprints and a bootleg DVD of Mean Girls. It runs on pure, unresolved drama." Kira leaned in. "Is it safe?" "Absolutely not," Angie said. "But it's us." Julia stared at the drive. She saw everything they'd built in it. Fury, humor, trauma, strength. All the things the Council tried to erase. All the things Chad called hysterics. She nodded. "Install it in the main cannon." They launched one final assault. The Chaos Drive lit up like a Broadway stage. The sky over MB-09 turned hot pink. A psychic wave of emotional honesty washed over the battlefield, exposing every repressed memory, every forgotten breakup, every "it's not you, it's me." Fraternity ships began spiraling. One pilot started crying about commitment. Another confessed he never understood the Matrix. Chad's cruiser faltered, AI systems overwhelmed with emotional logs. On the bridge of the Nope cannon, Julia fired the final shot, a glitter bomb encoded with every voicemail Chad never returned. The explosion was majestic. Planet Mom's basement shuddered under the weight of its own emotional constipation, and cracked. When the dust settled, the empire of spite floated triumphant over the remains of a failed ideology. Kira clapped her hands once. "We just therapy bombed them." Danny wiped tears from her eyes. "I'm proud of us." Julia exhaled, eyes on the screen, watching Chad's escape pod drift aimlessly through space. "Some things," she said, "you can't logic your way out of." And the empire of spite, a little battered but stronger than ever, turned toward the stars once more. There was still a council to deal with, but they'd just survived their own history, which meant they could survive anything. The Galactic Council didn't send a war fleet. They sent a fruit basket. Literally. A sleek diplomatic vessel arrived at G42 with its weapons deactivated, its hull painted with flowers, and a terrified ambassador trembling inside a glass capsule, clutching a woven basket of exotic fruits and a handwritten note that read, "Please let's talk. We surrender. Also sorry." Julia Ragewood read it aloud twice before snorting coffee out her nose. "They sent mangoes," she said to Kira, blinking. "Mangoes. And a guava," Angie noted, holding it up like evidence at a war crimes tribunal. "Is this a trap?" Danny asked, already scanning the basket for hidden devices. "Like, are the grapes poisoned? Is the apology genetically coded?" "They're panicking," Julia said. "They've realized banning us created their worst-case scenario." It had taken less than 6 months. 6 months for the Empire of Spite to become not just a thorn in the Council's side, but a legend. They'd embarrassed the most powerful regimes in the galaxy, outwitted a Council-funded ex-boyfriend army, and converted entire star systems with nothing more than grit, glitter, and the power of unfiltered emotion. They hadn't just survived exile, they'd weaponized it. And now, the same dignitaries who called them unfit for governance wanted peace. Julia didn't trust it. She stood in the war room, boots planted on a console, eyes fixed on the Council's official transmission looping on the screen. Harelthek, that smooth-talking serpent, addressed the galaxy with the stiffness of someone swallowing their pride one syllable at a time. "To the distinguished leadership of the Spite-born Empire," he began. "The Council acknowledges recent, unintended consequences. We recognize that exclusion was perhaps poorly judged. In light of current events, we propose a summit, a dialogue, perhaps reconciliation." Julia raised one brow. "He sounds like he just stepped barefoot on a Lego made of his own ego." "They're desperate," Angie said. "Our memes destabilize their education systems. Half their youth are staging glitter protests. The other half have started listening to Alanis Morissette and questioning everything. We broke their empire with mood boards and sarcasm," Kira added. "I say we make them sweat." But Julia wasn't smiling. She turned away from the screen, hands clasped behind her back, staring out the panoramic window at the chaos they'd built from scrap and spite. "They don't want peace. They want control. If we meet them on their terms, they'll spin it. Pretend they invited us back. Reframe the narrative. Make it look like we were the unstable ones until we came around. So we blow them up?" Danny offered, a little too eagerly. "No," Julia said slowly. "We do something worse. We outmaneuver them. On our terms." The summit was set on neutral ground, Asteroid 118b, a floating diplomatic station known for its serenity, white walls, and strictly regulated ambience. A place where nothing loud was allowed, and no weapons were permitted. Julia's team arrived in a battlecruiser shaped like a jagged wedge of middle fingers. They docked with zero subtlety, trailing confetti-colored engine flare, and a loudspeaker blasting Destiny's Child. No weapons on them, just confidence, powered exosuits disguised as fashion statements, and enough trauma-healing sass to power a small moon. Harelthek met them at the airlock with a stiff smile. Ambassador Ragewood. Sup, Harky, she replied, chewing gum with terrifying cheer. Nice digs. Smells like overpriced air freshener and condescension. His eye stalks twitched. We hope this meeting will be constructive. Depends on your definition, Julia said, casually spinning a pen like a knife. We prefer creative destruction. The council chamber was exactly as Julia remembered, sterile, symmetrical, and designed by someone allergic to joy. The delegates sat around the luminous oval table, like anxious parents confronting a teenager who just crash-landed a spaceship into the garage. Julia sat dead center, legs crossed, flanked by her team. Harelthek cleared his throat. We acknowledge that the decision to ban human women may have been hasty. Hasty. Julia tilted her head. You called us biological volatility wrapped in emotional warfare. I had it stitched on a pillow. The Vithari ambassador chimed in nervously. We've observed that your empire has, despite expectations, achieved cohesion, loyalty, military success, cultural impact, widespread meme proliferation, and somehow a functioning economy based on spite. We call a spite coin, Danny whispered. It's backed by caffeine futures. Harelthek pressed on. Given these developments, the Council wishes to reintegrate the spite-born empire. We are willing to offer full status, trade partnerships, diplomatic recognition, and... No, Julia said, standing slowly. You don't get to offer. You don't own the table anymore. A stunned silence. You didn't just underestimate us, she continued, walking around the chamber, letting her words cut. You tried to erase us. Because we were inconvenient. Loud. Unfiltered. Passionate. You told the galaxy we were chaos. You know what we really are. She stopped beside the holographic council seal and tapped it. It glitched. She smiled. We're human. And we made that contagious. Kira stood. You think we want a seat at your table? We build our own. And it has cup holders and universal health care. Angie added, also karaoke Tuesdays. And emotional support corgis, Danny chimed in. We didn't come here to beg for inclusion, Julia said. We came to set terms. She tossed a data pad on the table. It projected a new seal, a fierce phoenix rising from a galaxy of junk and fire, the insignia of the spite-born empire. We want you to acknowledge us, not as a subset, not as a curiosity, as a sovereign galactic superpower. We want open trade. We want representation. We want a holiday. A holiday, the Threxian ambassador sputtered. Spite Day, Julia said. Celebrated with glitter, music, and petty vengeance. It's healing. This is non-negotiable, Julia said. Harelthek hesitated. And if we refuse? Julia leaned in, voice low and razor-sharp. Then we unleash the full cultural chaos of humanity. You think it's bad now? We haven't even deployed TikTok yet. One of the council aides gasped audibly. We've got a generation of humans who grew up on sarcasm, memes, trauma, and zero respect for unjust authority, Kira said. You can't outvote that. You can't outgun that. Danny nodded. We made space espresso machines that double as grenade launchers. And mood-lighting weapons, Angie added. They don't kill, just induce overwhelming self-awareness. Another beat of silence. Then Harelthek, after conferring silently with the others, sighed. Very well. The Galactic Council recognizes the spite-born empire as a sovereign entity. We will accept the holiday. Julia didn't smile. She simply nodded. Good. Now let's talk reparations. Later that night, as the spite-born delegation departed the summit to thunderous applause from watching alien youth, Julia stood once again at the viewport, this time gazing at the stars not as a rebel, but as an emperor. Kira appeared beside her, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. You did it. Julia shrugged. We did it. Together. Through fire, sass, and emotional resilience. Think I'll try anything again? Probably. But we've got karaoke, war glitter, and emotional depth. Let them try. Behind them, the crew celebrated. Mecha Karen did a slow dance with a traffic droid. Clippy argued with a toaster about existentialism. Angie led a conga line of therapy robots, all quoting friends. Julia raised her mug and whispered, to the band, the broken, the loud, and the fed up. We didn't just survive the council. We made them afraid to ever underestimate a human woman again. And far in the distance, beyond the spiral arms of the galaxy, a new transmission pinged the Spikeborne network. Earth had sent a warning. A new ban was incoming. Julia's eyes narrowed. Looks like the universe just asked for a sequel. She smirked. Ladies, start the portal engines.